Hey everyone, this is Ty. Just wanted to let you know we had some major technical difficulties with this episode. That's why the episode is late, and also there's some audio jankiness on my part for about the first half of the episode. I did everything I could to salvage as much as I could, and I had to re-record some of it. So again, I apologize. Not up to our usual production standards, but it's otherwise a fantastic episode that goes very deep into a beloved game and a beloved game magazine that we have lots of opinions about. So I hope you will deal with a little bit of audio non-optimalness and continue listening, subscribing, sharing, following, and supporting FunFactor. Thanks.
Hey, Ty, can you count to 10?
Sure. 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Nice, nailed it.
Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. You've got Fun Factor, two old gamers reviewing old video game magazine reviews. I'm Ty Shelter, he's Aidan Moher, and we're two professional writers who grew up loving the video games and video game magazines of the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. Every episode, we take a critical look back on the games media that, for better and for worse, inspired us to do what we do. First, go to funfactorpod.com. Follow the show on your podcatcher of choice. Leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your media. We'll read the best, kindest, funniest, and most insightful ones on the air in our letters section. Please consider becoming a member of FunFactor Ultra, our premium tiers that unlock ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and, though swanky, members-only channels of our Discord. Just go to funfactorpod.com, and I promise you, you cannot miss the sign-up widget on our homepage. Then, help us spread the word. Shout us out on Blue Sky at funfactorpod.com and everywhere else at FunFactorPod.
So, Ty, we're sitting in separate rooms in separate countries right now, but have you noticed it's a big white elephant in both of these rooms with us?
Whoa! I didn't see it there until you said so.
It's been there the whole time and just been getting more obvious. We're reaching a dozen episodes of Fun Factor, and it's pretty clear at this point that, for obvious reasons, the two of us have a very North American-centric experience with games media. You know, Game Fan, Game Players, EGM, Nintendo Power, like all of these magazines were made in the US and focused heavily on that market, you know, with occasional coverage of Japanese games.
Oh, well, yeah, because this show, of course, was focused on our experiences of the magazines we had at the time, playing the games we knew at the time, right? But now seen through this lens where we can go back and access all of them, and we can access all of them from everywhere, even the ones we didn't have access to.
Right. And so a few episodes ago, 2 episodes over the course of our run so far, you've mentioned when we covered Next Generation and Intelligent Gamer that they reminded you of a British gaming magazine called Edge. Both of those magazines, and they're kind of steered towards a more maybe adult or mature audience, was modeled heavily off that magazine. So we're going to take a look at Edge today, see what it looks like, see what how it differs from those North American versions of it, and what sort of similarities exist, what differences exist, and what market niche they filled. But first, let's wind back. What sort of similarities drew you to that conclusion that Next Generation and Intelligent Gamer was sort of a North American take on Edge?
Well, my first clue was doing research for our first Next Generation issue and Googling and seeing, shared masthead, future US, future UK, shared parent publishing company. Apparently, Next Generation was kind of a port over to the US from the UK's Edge magazine. I didn't know. I'd heard of Edge magazine. I'd heard people talk about it, like on podcasts or whatever. But I did not know until we did this show just how much editorial and influence personnel was shared between the two.
Right. Yeah, I obviously didn't really have experience with Edge during the time period we're covering right now, which is that sort of generational leap in the mid-90s. From what I recall, though, my first introduction to Edge was just in an airport in London when I was backpacking through Europe, like almost exactly 20 years ago in 2005. There's all those airport bookstores. I go in, I'm looking for something to do, and there's this beautiful magazine It's Edge number 150, and it had Twilight Princess on the cover. And of course, I was like, I gotta buy this. This looks amazing. You flip through it, and just the quality was immediately apparent. I was blown away by, everything from the just really clean, precise design to the big, bold image on the cover. It reminds me now, looking back, of like what Game Informer was able to do, because they were sort of tied to, GameStop in the way that they were. They didn't have to like blast kind of advertorial stuff on their covers. Edge was the same way. And so like I grabbed that magazine and I carted it all across Europe with me just so I could bring it home. Just beautifully put together, high stock paper, and the writing itself was just separated from what we were seeing in North America at the time. And there was very good games media coverage. And we'll talk about 1UP and the Ziff Davis stuff and EGM and all of that, later in the run of the show. But Edge was doing something really interesting at that time, and it was so compelling to me, but I couldn't get my hands on it other than when it sort of randomly would pop up at a bookstore in my city, and I could like get it, but it would be like $15. So it was really expensive, but worth it. It presented itself more as like a culture magazine than a capital G gamer magazine. Did you have experience, or do you have experience now with Edge or the rest of sort of the British games media scene?
No, actually, outside of like listening to episodes of like Retronauts or My Perfect Console with Simon Parkin, where he interviews a lot of people who were like him in the British games journalism scene at the time, or since in between then and now. And the one funny overlap is that in the early aughts, I had a toe in the import tuner culture, so I was reading car magazines as well, and it was very funny because my several bookstores imported Max Power, which similarly was a British car magazine that was more of presented as a car culture magazine, and more specifically presented as what might be called a lad magazine. So there were topless women in the magazine, and the books they didn't know, and I didn't know either until I picked up a copy of Max Power and went, oh, what's that? Oh, British import too. Oh, okay, that's okay, I see what we're doing now. Yeah,
you only read it for the cars.
Yeah. Oh boy. So, and again, I think we've actually talked about just in this past episode, the Christmas episode, they're talking about an ad for Demolition Derby 2 in the UK, where there were two leather-clad dominatrices whipping some guy in a Demolition Derby car for no apparent reason other than it was allowed to be done in UK advertising standards at the time and not here. So, yeah, definitely that. But the UK games media and games culture is very interesting, and just like in regular journalism too, news journalism, right? There's different standards, there's different accepted practices of editorial and objectivity, your relationships to sources, your relationships to the industry, that kind of a thing. And I'm not educated enough to elucidate all those specifically, and certainly not when it comes to the games culture and coverage, and especially differences between then and now. But if you listen to Simon Parkin and My Perfect Console, he will talk to people, and then he'll spend 20 minutes on the back end correcting every little mistake that he made, and also fact checking his guests as well. If they make a misstatement, he will kind of go back into it. So I really appreciate his in particular commitment to getting it right, and I have to believe that they were really leading the way. And I think again one more diversion back towards Wipeout. The Liverpool and Bath games dev scenes were extremely cool and way ahead of the curve in terms of design and culture, and dipping into the rave and clubbing scene in England at the time, in the UK at the time, right? So I think there's a lot of really cool stuff in the industry coming out of UK at that time, and media was also right there on the cutting edge with it.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. My experience, like yours, is through sort of British games journalists, especially at the time, like Pete Davison not Pete Davison. Pete is a wonderful member of our Discord community and has a fabulous website, Moegamer, Moegamer. But it's actually his brother, John Davison, who ran a lot of the Ziff Davis stuff during sort of the heyday of 1UP. And so he was British. I'm not sure, where how he kind of ended up at Ziff in that way, but I didn't have experience with the actual magazines. But even just looking through this one issue, it's very curious to me how it does present itself as a separate region, and it did have its own perspective on console releases or game releases. And as you're going to see, we're going to review a review of a game that is exceptionally popular, but it never came out in the UK on the Super Nintendo. And so, there is that sort of perspective where, the way that we as North Americans would look at Japanese releases and be like, oh, why didn't that come here? That also happened in the UK in its own way and in Europe in its own way. I'm really excited to dig into this episode. So let's get going.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're thinking, gosh, Ty, Aidan, if you have a bunch of contacts in your community who are deeply steeped in the British game mag industry scene, why don't you have them on for an episode or spend more time digging into that? And listeners, have faith. We will get there. I promise. There's so much meat on that bone. Like, there was lots more to talk about in terms of the UK scene and UK games. We are just getting our teeth a little bit sunk into this. When we come back from this break, we will flip open the cover of Edge magazine and just see exactly how far ahead of the curve those folks were right here on FunFactor. Welcome back to FunFactor, where two old gamers review old video game magazine reviews. Of course, we would love for you to review us. If we get a full 5.0 stars in FunFactor, go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. We will read the best, funniest, kindest, and most entertaining ones on the air. Same goes for YouTube. YouTube comments work, even kind messages on our Discord. But of course, Apple Podcasts star ratings and reviews help spread the word, help boost us on the platform and get more listeners to us, which means more opportunity for me and Aidan to keep doing this for us and for you. All right, so Aidan, what's the deal with Edge?
What is the deal with Edge? I think you could. I don't think it would be a stretch to say that Edge is just one of the best gaming magazines that has existed in England or North America or worldwide or anywhere. It set the tone for sort of just more serious, like small s, lowercase s, serious, but more serious game discussion that was then adopted by, like Western magazines, whether that was through its sort of sister publication, Next Generation, like we talked about, or others. But Edge was sort of leading the way, and we're going to dig into how and why that happened a little bit on this episode. But we're going to look at, today, Edge number 16. It's from January 1995. So we're a little early on the time period we're talking about. But this is, the year. This is a huge year, and this issue in particular deals with, upcoming details about the PlayStation launch, the Saturn launch, and there's even stuff in there about 32X, which I thought was interesting as like a stopgap. And then we're going to get to a fun game review. This issue has 116 pages. There are 10 games reviewed for 8 systems, which include 3DO, PC, CDI, Amiga, SNES, Jaguar, Mega CD, which our North American listeners will know as the Sega CD, and the 32X. So that is that's a hodgepodge of consoles, I will just say, and I love that.
Yeah, that's a wild list, and also 10 reviews for 8 systems.
10 reviews, 8 systems, and then you got to see this cover. So if you are watching the audio feed, check out Edge number 16. We'll have a link in the show notes. Or if you're watching the YouTube video, we'll have it up there for you right now. This cover, this is everything Retro Games Media was made for, Ty. On the cover of Edge 16, which was available for £3, Great British pounds, we've got a huge 3D rendering of like a guy sticking out his tongue.
Yeah.
He's got a Sega Saturn controller. And he's like drenched in the reflection of the game he's playing, which I think is the game he's in. Very, very, very mid 90s. It was that like, it reminds me so heavily of like the obsession with like polygonal graphics and art. And like, it looks bad, right? Like it looks like something I would have made in 3D Studio Max.
I would say,
like,
split the difference in your mind between Reboot the cartoon and the Dire Straits I Want My MTV video. Like about halfway in between those two landmarks is the level of quality we're talking about.
Yeah. All it needs is a headline saying, "This is real gameplay," or "Can graphics get better than this?" Very mid-90s, like I said. Under the magazine title, we got a list of game consoles and publishers, just sort of like a mix of them. Sony, Sega, Nintendo, 3DO, PC, Amiga, you got SNK in there, Arcade, NEC, and CDI. And I think that also just kind of goes to show how different the market was over in the UK. Because I don't think you were really getting a lot of like NEC or CDI. Like, you were getting a bit of coverage here and there, but it wasn't kind of blasted on the front of the magazines over here. But I think what's really interesting with that in mind, interesting context, is the tagline for the magazine, which is in the top left corner of the cover, is "The future of interactive entertainment." Not video games, interactive entertainment. And I think that is something that Edge used to separate itself. That it was looking at games as part of a larger cultural movement. Yeah, what do you think about this cover? Before I get into some of the details, what's your take?
Yeah, well, so first of all, true next generation sickos will know they also use this tagline, "The future of interactive entertainment," on the next generation cover at first. And the fonts, actually some of the fonts are the same. It's very, very similar to Next Generation. And in what I'm guessing is a coincidence, Aidan, you've picked January 1995, which is also the debut month of Next Generation. So that's Next Generation 01, released the same month as Edge 16. So you have almost a year and a half lag between what Edge was doing and the parent company going, "Okay, cool, let's do this same thing but in North America," right? So it's still different. There's still a split in the sensibility. The cover of Next Generation 01 is like a really nice Virtua Fighter 1 cover. It's but playing in some of the same sandbox in terms of selling this as this is the future is here, it's 3D, it's polygons, it's all these next generation systems, it's not 16-bit, and you are so excited for the future, and even though it isn't here really, we're gonna talk to you like it is.
And like, I love how the publisher had to get their name in there in the tagline, "The future of
yes
Future Publishing." It reminds me, I'm a Vancouver Canucks fan, and their logo is a big orca, and that's because they were once owned by Orca Bay Entertainment or something, and the ownership wanted the orca to tie them to the company that owned them, and it's ridiculous.
Great, yes.
Love it when the parent company gets in there, gets their little fingies in there. Hovering near the guy's face is so I guess what you would say is like the feature headline. It says LBA, all in uppercase, Adeline's Triumph of Imagination. I know this stands for Little Big Adventure because I've read this issue of the magazine.
Oh.
I know that this guy playing Sega Saturn is from Little Big Adventure because I've read this magazine. That's not exactly obvious to people who are looking at this on the newsstands. But you get something a little more compelling down by his opposite cheek in the kind of bottom left corner. It says Saturn, all in big gray letters, and then it says Edge lifts the lid on Sega's Game Box. Game Box, Ty. Game Box, all one word, Game Box.
That's definitely a thing that we called them.
What?
No, it's not. No, I've never called it a Game Box.
It was written by someone from the silent generation. They had a copy editor who was like, "Oh, what is it? Game console, no, game box. It's a game. Anyway.
My favorite artifact of that from this era was set top box. They'd use set dash top space box because you put it on top of your TV set. Which
those were the days.
In just a few short years, the idea, number one, even at the time, it's like, okay, well, I own 4 set-top boxes between my game consoles, my cable box, my VCR, run down the list. Like, they can't all go on top of the TV. So,
well, and you couldn't keep wired controllers up there either.
Right.
The wired controllers would just dangle, which was always irritating. But anyway, we were still trying to figure out the language of not just games criticism, as cultural criticism, but also just what the heck to call the boxes near our TVs, on top or beside or below, that we're playing our games. We're going to flip a page and head on over to the masthead. Edge magazine debuted in October 1993 with an issue hyping up the quote-unquote Dream Machine 3DO and how it was going to, quote, and I quote, change the face of video games. Which, well...
no, not so much.
Not so much. But listen, things got better from here. The masthead for Edge 16 is impressively slim. Jason Brooks is listed as editor. Kerry Vines is production editor. Rob Abbott and Jez Bridgman are on art. The only listed writer is James Flynn. Rounding things out are consultant editor Steve Jarrett, and then Tokyo Bureau's Nicholas DiCostanzo. That's not many people, especially compared to what we were seeing from North American magazines at the time. There might have been freelancers involved, but since the magazine has 0 bylines, it's really impossible to tell. I have to think there were people that they were hiring to write some of this stuff, because there's a lot of words in each of these, and there's no way one editor and one writer could be doing all of it.
No.
But it's a minuscule number of people to be making a magazine. One of my favorite things about this masthead, though, outside of podcasting and writing, I have a background in design. I've worked in design for a long time. This masthead actually has production details about Edge magazine. So it lists the hardware they used: Power Macintosh, Quadra something, I can't read that on the PDF. Software Express, Photoshop, Tapestry, Freehand, and Nissus. Let me zoom in on that a little bit. Nissus. And then it even has like the typography: Bell Gothic Light, Gill Sans Bold. And then the spot color for this issue, Pantone 8400. I've never seen that before in a masthead, but I love it. And I wish we got more details like that in
that's cool.
In stuff like magazines, just the same way I'd love to see more credits in a book. I want to know, like, list the editor, list the copy editor, list the people everybody who had hands on that book. As somebody who's written a book, there's so many people who are involved and make that book the best it can be. And I love learning little details about that. And, I make a magazine, and, I make a podcast about magazines. Of course, I like that stuff, but why not? It's fun.
Yeah, and by the way, for some more info on that, not to keep hammering Simon Parkett, which, if you're listening to this, you should be listening to My Perfect Console as well. But 2 episodes ago, at the time of our recording, Nathan Brown, who was a longtime writer with Edge and also edited Edge later towards the end of its run, was a guest on My Perfect Console and went very heavily into detail on some of the production stuff and how he got hired, which amounts to he sent a hopeful email about 3 minutes after somebody left. And they're like, oh no, what are we going to do? Hey, I got this email from this kid who says he wants to write for us. Like, yeah, could you come on? He's been writing about local city council elections for 6 months because he wants to be a journalist. Let's go. Incredible.
If only it still worked that way.
Oh, yeah.
Nathan actually runs a fabulous newsletter called Hit Points that anyone who likes FunFactor would love as well. After Edge, Jason Brooks, who's listed as editor, I assume that means like editor-in-chief, the person who ran the magazine, moved over to the US to work on magazines like Xbox Nation and GMR. Sadly, however, Brooks passed away in 2019 after 3 years of illness. There's a really, really lovely eulogy published by Keith Stewart on Eurogamer. Keith worked with Jason at Edge, and just had a very lovely perspective on who Jason was, what his personality and history and experience brought them to the magazine. And he started working at Edge just a few months after this issue. So I want to read a little bit about that because I think it says a lot about the magazine. Jason Brooks began his journalism career at the cult Super Nintendo magazine Superplay, under the tutorage of launch editor Matt Bealby. He'd originally applied for a job on the Sega magazine, Mega, but editor Neil West soon realized Brooks was a complete Nintendo fanboy and pushed him Bealby's way. From the start, we were influenced by Japanese magazines, not just games mags, but women's mags, car mags, and anything else we could get our hands on, as well as Japanese comics and anime, says Bealby. What struck me about Jason was just how much he knew about and loved Japanese culture, and gaming in particular, and Nintendo especially amongst that. He knew more about all of it than the rest of us put together.
That's cool. And also, Neil West, again, if you've listening to our prior episodes on Next Generation, or we're just a Next Generation sicko, Neil West was also the editor of Next Generation. So, again, very, very close publishing cousins here. That's really, I think it shows in the design of the magazine that it's not just an evolution of video games magazines by people who only read and write video game magazines, right?
Yes.
These are artists and designers and journalists that are aware of and consuming magazines of all stripes and from all different influences around the globe, and not just, what them and their rivals are doing, right? Because it's so far apart from, again, if you go back to the first one, you said 93, late 93, the first one came out. If you look at US gaming magazines in 1993, it's closer to 8-bit Hangover than 16-bit Hangover, what those games looks like. And again, yes, future seasons of this show, folks, we'll get there. But yeah, this love of not just the art itself, but the work of covering the art, the work of games media, definitely shows through in this design, production, and execution.
Yeah, and having the confidence to put video games up alongside those other culture mags, right? And say, gaming culture is as interesting or, is a platform for interesting stories just as much as card mags and stuff like that, which is really great. Later in the eulogy, Stewart described the ethos of Edge. He says, in 1993, Future Publishing's magazine launch specialist, Steve Jarrett, was looking for writing staff to help with an ambitious project. It was a new type of games magazine, eschewing the pally, hobbyist tone of most publications of the era in favor of a serious, refined, journalistic style, inspired by visual effects mag Cinefex. That project was Edge.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I'm furiously searching Cinefex right now because that's cool.
Yeah, and it says it all, right? And you feel that and you see that. And it took, again, going back to the idea that games were as important as movies, and they could support cultural criticism as well as movies could, or TV or books or music or anything else sort of within the cultural space. Stewart closes the eulogy with a message to all of us, which I really want to read because I think Brooks' message through Stewart lives on through their work together and what it says about what Brooks brought to Edge. This is what I have learned from Jason Brooks. Be good at what you do. Take care. Make every sentence you write, every image you capture, every idea you foster mean something. And if you are given the chance to thank someone for helping you, take that chance. In fact, do it now.
And man, I'm struck so hard by the contrast with today's games media editors and executives. No, I don't want to say editors. I mean the people in charge of the business people running the magazines, running the outlets, where doing a good job, taking care is the last thing on their mind. People that are taking care and trying to do the best they can with the tools that they've been given and the budgets and turnaround times that they've had to work with, being rewarded time and again with waves of layoffs, as they're just strip mining what's left of this industry. who has their hands on the tiller of the outlets that are doing the work that we still look to and are inspired by and play games partly to engage with. It's shocking and upsetting, the contrast.
Yeah, I urge everybody, we'll put a link in the show notes, read the eulogy for Jason Brooks, because I think it says so much about how we can all be better people and bosses and colleagues and friends and writers and creators, and everything that he put into Edge and the other projects that he worked on. The things that people had to say about him show how amazing the people are who want to work in this space, but they need to be given the room and the time and the resourcing to do that job together and create something special. And I think Edge is a pretty special magazine, and that shows.
Absolutely, it does. And we are only 2 pages in. It's time for the flip through.
Kicking off the flip through, I want us to quickly skim through a PlayStation preview that starts on page 7. Specifically, I want to take a look at the lead for this piece, because I think will be pretty notable in terms of like context for this time. Edge kicks off this piece, which is sort of a summary of a press event that they went to for the PlayStation in Tokyo. Quote, "Even though interest in the PlayStation is already approaching fever pitch in Japan, Sony is taking no chances on the launch of the machine slipping by unnoticed." That really says so much. Like, that is such a critical point for mid-90s video games, because as we all know, later in this episode, or later in this issue, there's a huge kind of unpacking of the Sega Saturn. And they even talk about how, like, as they were putting this magazine together, it like came out. The Saturn, just out of nowhere. And we all kind of know in hindsight how badly that botched launch, where they just sort of like put the Saturn out there without telling anybody, without games, trying to get ahead of the PlayStation, really hurt the Saturn and hurt Sega. But Sony was so meticulous that despite all of that momentum, all of that energy, all of that excitement about Sony entering the gaming space, they didn't take their foot off the gas, right? They kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and it obviously worked very well for them. I also just thought this preview itself was sort of like a relic of the past these days. Like, now when there's like new console launches, we're sitting at home watching a YouTube stream, but so are all the journalists, like maybe a select few, but like nobody was getting to go out to look at the Switch too, right? Like it was shown off at some events, but not in a way that there were deep dives into its tech. Like everybody was sitting there watching YouTube.
Right. Well, they get there's the YouTube launch, and then select, journalists and influencers are invited to events where they're given like canned 20-minute playtest sessions, and the people helping are like, college kids getting paid part-time, marketing interns, not the executives of the company who made all the decisions, going, here's the decisions that we made and why we made them. Also, by the way, Aidan, talk about putting your foot on the gas. All that time you've been talking, and I've been staring at the picture of the Namco NegCon, just going NegCon, Ridge Racer, Ridge Racer, Ridge Racer. Come on. I didn't have one, but I desperately wanted one.
No, yeah, they're pretty cool. And so like this preview does go into some of the like the accessories as well, like the NegCon, but also memory cards, because those were pretty new to people at the time.
Right.
I think overall this piece was pretty positive. I'm pretty excited about the PlayStation. They were really pleased with the price of PlayStation games being quite a bit cheaper. Like I said, it makes a point of highlighting Sony's aggressive marketing momentum with their first console, but it's also not all sunshine. There's some concern cited about the controller's like high volume of buttons, which is pretty funny in hindsight. And for those FunFactor hosts out there who love to complain about Digital Foundry, there's even mention of Ridge Racer only running at 30 FPS compared to its speedier arcade counterpart.
Also, for folks in the video feed, these screenshots here, there's these thumbnails Number 9, if you'll notice, is what must be a very early build of Toshinden, because there's a character, that model, that's not Rungo. That's not what he looks like. So I'm fascinated because I don't think that character was in the final build of the actual game. And also, I have no idea what's going on. They're just described as Gorod shaded dancing fighters in number 5. It looks like some sort of chorus line
like
of Zangiefs, but with like a big floral background.
Honestly, looks pretty good. I would play that. Then beside that, there's a big T-Rex that actually looks pretty sick. Like there was no like the Tomb Raider dinosaurs never looked that good, but that was an early tech demo for the PlayStation, I think. But yeah, like overall, like it was just really like a positive, interesting way of looking at what people were saying about the PlayStation before its release. But we're not even supposed to be talking about the PlayStation. That wasn't even on the cover. So I didn't pick today's issue for the PlayStation coverage, but I actually want to look at Sega's next gen push. There's a Saturn later. We'll probably hold off on some Saturn talk until a different episode. Specifically, I want us to look, it's right after the PlayStation preview, at Sega and their little stopgap that couldn't, the 32X. On page 10. We'll get there. On page 10, so right after the PlayStation preview, Edge kicks off a 32X preview called, quote, Sega fills next-gen hiatus with 32X. Can you read the intro for me, Ty?
When Sega announced the release of its 32-bit add-on in spring 1994, it couldn't have foreseen the cool reception it would receive. While the Japanese video games industry basks in the rising sun of new hardware launches, many believe that the US and Europe are quietly suffering the ignominy, I've never known how to pronounce this word, ignominy of being force-fed a, quote, Yuletide filler.
The 32X was so strange. We're going to, like, as you'll see, I'm going to read some more from the article, but it's such a strange piece of tech because, like, the Saturn was right there and was released early, like, but they were trying to fill this gap, bizarre circumstances. But Edge actually kind of fills in a little bit of the, gives some answers to some of the questions I've always had about the 32X. So a little further along in the preview here, we have this doozy of a quote. Quote, it's basically a tiny version of the Saturn, one developer told Edge. The processors run a damn sight slower, for a start, and it doesn't have proper hardware assist for texture mapping. The 32X was built for America, he continued. Sega are terrified of eroding everything they've worked for in the States. That's why they've decided to concentrate on this instead of Saturn. The driving force behind the development of 32X was Sega of America, which is keen to capitalize on the huge installed user base of Genesis owners and the general anticipation for 32-bit gaming. Sega of America is hoping to shift 600,000 units by the end of 1995 and has earmarked $10 million to market the machine. So they basically got the yips, hey?
Yes,
they just
literally
didn't wild. And like $10 million to market it. I think this is 1995. So like 2 years later, I think, what did Square spend on Final Fantasy VII marketing alone? 40 million, I think. And so like, they were doing this whole 32X thing, trying to like capitalize on the Sega Genesis's success, which was bigger in the UK, I understand, than North America. But 10 million is not that much money to market it to people. If you want it to sort of like let you ride out maybe 2 to 3 years between console releases, kind of like the Game Boy Advance almost, which was like a 3-year system between the Game Boy and the Nintendo DS. I was a Nintendo kid, so I didn't have a 32X. I didn't have a Genesis. So the only time I ever played it was at my dad's friend's house in Edmonton when we went to visit, and they had a 32X of Doom. I've talked about 32X version of Doom before. It's pretty good. Did you ever have a 32X, Ty? Did it capture your little American heart?
No. My rich friend was, rich, relatively speaking. His parents were small business owners, and so, like, so he kind of got every new thing for a little while there, and so he had one. I don't think I ever bothered playing it. I'm not sure that he even had any 32X exclusive games, or if he did, they were not any that any of us ever played with, despite there being the opportunity and it sitting right there.
Yeah, and there is a release schedule for 32X games, and I'm looking at it, and most of it's just stuff you could play elsewhere anyway. Street Fighter the movie, the game.
I caught that they put schedule subhead. The following titles are all slated for release on 32X. When they actually arrive is anybody's guess. And then there's no time even. There's not even projection. This is just a list of title and publisher. That's it.
And then here's a crazy quote from Tom Kalinske. Is that? Sorry, let me see.
Yeah, I think that's
And
right.
here's a crazy pull quote in the article from Tom Kalinske, who's president of Sega of America at the time. Quote, Saturn will be at a price point that will not make it a mass market item. In terms of excitement, it's Genesis and 32X. That's just a
Bananas.
company that's just completely given up, right?
Bananas.
On forward momentum. When we talk about PlayStation and Sony, putting so much energy and into building momentum and excitement, and here you have the president of Sega of America saying, "Oh, the Saturn's too expensive. Nobody's going to buy it. So we've got this little upgrade.
Diet Saturn."
What an insane quote.
Monster, and it's also highlights the huge difference in the relationship between Sega of America and Sega versus Nintendo of America and Nintendo. Because Nintendo of America still, if you listen to people who are ex-Nintendo, Nintendo of Japan has just an absolute iron grip on everything Nintendo of America is doing.
If Doug Bowser said something like that, he would be seppuku'd. I don't even know if that's how you use that word.
Yeah.
He would just his Nintendo brain chip would take over, and he would just
immediately the plug would be pulled Matrix style.
Yeah.
He'd just go limp.
And exactly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, he exactly. But for Kalinske to come out and be basically say, we think Sega of Japan fucked up with the Saturn.
Right.
So we are making them make us a different console for you guys.
And we told them our install base is our biggest advantage. We can't give up on all the Saturns under people's or over people's or next to or people's TVs. So make us or we will make a diet version of the Saturn running at way lower clock speeds with fewer helper chips, and we're just going to chunk it into it.
This is after they already had the Sega CD as well.
Right.
There's already an add-on for Genesis, and so it's just everybody laughs about the stacked, the Sega Genesis stack, right? But it is kind of absurd, and the fact that it kind of exists the way that it does because Kalinske and Sega of America just weren't confident in the Saturn. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think.
Yeah.
We've talked about how I like the Saturn a lot. I didn't really care about it when it was around. In hindsight, I think it's a fabulous system, but based on its Japanese library. And if Sega of America was never going to get behind it, it was never going to be successful. Before we move on to the next topic, the next section, there's a big data stream sidebar on this article about the 32X, and it says data stream, UK pre-Christmas TV marketing budget for the Game Boy, £1 million. Number of pages that could fit onto one CD-ROM, 200,000. But here we get to the sicko Aidan stuff down about midway through. Number of lines on a VHS tape, 260. Number of lines on an SVHS tape, 400. Which I assume is referring to the vertical resolution of CRT TVs, which of course I'm into.
Yeah.
So I don't know why this is here. Number of Jaguars Atari plans to have installed in the US by the end of the year, 7. I don't even think they made that. I'm just kidding. We're gonna move on. I could read these quotes all day.
Yeah. By the way, interesting note. I searching very quickly. That $10 million budget said Sega of America is hoping to shift 600,000 units by the end of 1995, and has earmarked $10 million to market the machine. Wikipedia says that they sold 665,000 by the end of 1994, which almost can't be right. I mean, I guess it was because North America was November 21, 1994. So they sold 665,000 that Christmas season, which was their sales goal, but they only sold 800,000 ever. So after that Christmas, basically nobody bought one. And that's,
I mean, it was
that's kind of shocking that they actually hit their sales target for that holiday season and then just completely whiffed.
Gave up. Yeah. This issue was for the flip through. Like, this episode could have been so long. There's so many good things in here that I wanted to talk about. That we could even dedicate full episodes to. There's a 2-page spread immediately following the 32X bit about the death of the 3DO and the rise of the the M2.
Oh yeah.
Please, Ty, read this quote for me.
M2 is a real killer. It's basically a raw polygon processing accelerator, which is roughly 5 times more powerful than Sony's PlayStation.
Ty, would you believe that quote is from the senior VP of sales and marketing at 3DO?
Whoa.
There's a great piece about the US and UK fighting over the future of Amiga on page 17, and then a letter section with fan mail that's longer than some of the features in other magazines. This one from London's Garciano Soul touches directly on something we've talked about a lot on FunFactor. Quote, by their nature, reviews are subjective. One man's meat is another man's poison. Your magazine has an absolute right to express its opinions, blah, blah, blah. I finally managed to get a hold of Alien vs. Predator, and I can honestly say that your review was the most extraordinary exercise in bullshit I've read for a long time. It was so crammed with knee-jerk smugness and blistering illogicality that it's hard to know where to begin.
Blistering illogicality. I don't use that enough. I need to use that more.
It's a banger phrase that could be applied a lot on the internet these days. But he doesn't even stop there either. After several paragraphs, he concludes the letter with, quote, as for you, Edge, you run another risk. You are streets ahead of the other games mags. Your readers know it. Sadly, so do you. Your risk is smugness, a kind of more adult than thou approach to gaming which doesn't shirk from standing. Read like against the hurricane of popular opinion. The way I see it, AVP presented an irresistible target. Everyone had been talking about it for an infuriatingly long time, and poor old Atari had pinned its hopes on its success. Your reviewer couldn't wait to be the one to stick the knife in.
This is wild, and it's not only wild because, again, I keep bringing it up. As a next-gen stan, it is disorienting to me how similar this appears. However, the editorial tone, I want to point this out. Oh dear, Edge seems to have touched a raw nerve here. God forbid that anyone should dare to criticize the Jaguar's flagship game. Your implication that Edge should have pulled its punches simply because of Atari's precarious position in the console market runs contrary to everything the magazine said. So, like, the letters in are more caustic here, but also the replies are even more caustic, but in a particularly British way. Like
absolutely,
and
yeah.
Next Gen would try and handle these with a little more conciliatory. Okay, hey, we understand people have different opinions. We understand, if you're a Jaguar buyer, this means a lot to you. However, and they would still kind of come to the same conclusion of like, we have to stand by our editorial standards. But I feel like even, every once in a while it'd get a little, I hate myself for this, edgy, but Edge is just like openly mocking this writer for even implying that they have some sort of duty to the console wars to even begin to consider Atari's own fault for having a bad console in the market.
Yeah, it's like cutting politeness almost.
Yes.
There's even a screenshot of Alien versus Predator, and the caption is, Garciano Soul is slightly unhappy about Edge's appraisal of Alien versus Predator. Now, my understanding, too, we won't go too far into the weeds into Alien vs. Predator on the Jaguar, but I'm pretty sure it's a pretty well-regarded game historically.
Yes.
So, I'm sort of curious to go back and check it out and then read the review, because I would say that a cutting review of that game at that time would have stood out against general opinion, which is interesting. But we can only talk about letters for so long. I do want to say I'm really impressed with Garciano's letter for one particular reason. He managed to make Streets Ahead happen. Like, that's impressive. There was a whole, like, ongoing skit on Community about that. And they just needed Garciano's soul, I guess. Moving on, we're going to flip all the way to the back of the issue and skip some pretty fabulous stuff. Because there is a sizable profile on the legendary Sid Meier.
Oh.
If you're not familiar with Meier, he's the creator of Floyd of the Jungle, F-15 Strike Eagle, and Bank Game 1. And those are games he made. Those are his games.
That's the top of the IMDb page for Sid Meier for you.
I checked the tombstone he had pre-ordered, and those are the games he put on there.
Okay. All right. I'm going to survive.
If you're not familiar with Meier, and if you're especially not familiar with Meier's nose hairs, now you are. The content of this interview aside, which is like a pretty decent interview, the layout, for some like unfathomable reason, is loaded with close-up portrait photos of Meier's face. It's like the jump scare from Resident Evil if the dog leaping through the window was the most average white guy like you'd ever seen.
I'm gonna say here, and this is no slight to the man. Sid Meier is no Trip Hawkins. Some 90s video games executives were meant for the extreme close-up treatment. Sid was not on the top of the list.
No. He had a voice for game, or
a face for radio is what we say.
He had a face for game dev.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He had a brain for game dev too. He also has a game called Colonization, which I just feel like, probably wouldn't fly anymore. But he is a Canadian who grew up in Michigan. So he's kind of like the missing link between you and I.
I did not know that.
Look at that. Michigan and Canada. He is from the eastern Canadian provinces, which I don't necessarily approve of. But hey, Canada, we're united now. The United Provinces of Canada.
I can't even remember. I believe it was Next Generation had an interview with Bill Steely, who was one of the top people at Microprose under Sid Meier. And he was like the flight sim guy. Like he was a former pilot, I believe. Yes, former military pilot. So he was kind of at the heart of a lot of Microprose's flight sims and military sims of 20th century nature. And he used to just basically go around bragging. He would talk about how he would go around bragging about knowing Sid Meier and being Sid Meier's friend, and actually hired a guy out of a McDonald's drive-thru because he just went. They're like, oh yeah, like asked him for his order. He gave his order, and then I was like, hey, do you know like Civilization and such? I made those. And the kid goes, what? You're Sid Meier? He's like, hell no, I'm way better looking than he is. And like it ended up.
Is this real?
This is real. And
you're making this up.
No. Michael Chin, I even remember, was the guy's name. But like he literally hired this guy out of the McDonald's drive-thru because he just, as he apparently did everywhere, just name dropped some super nerdy computers.
You made Bank Game 1? Floyd of the Jungle?
Classics. All right. Well, listen, we said we could spend no more time on the letters section, but our time for other people's letters sections is very limited. Our time for you, our listeners, our community members, our subscribers, our FunFactor Ultra members is unlimited. We will make time for you and your comments, your reviews when we get back right here on FunFactor. We've got mail. As promised, we always review the best, funniest, kindest, and most entertaining 5-star Apple Podcast reviews on the air. Also, YouTube comments. Also, Discord questions. Bonus points if you say who your favorite host is and why. Double bonus points if it is Aidan. Aidan, we do have a couple of questions from the Discord today. A couple of comments. Folks, we're running out of 5-star Apple Podcast reviews. Go out there if you haven't. We need more.
Lots of them.
YouTube comments. We've got some great YouTube comments. Need more. Let's do it. We are trying to push, and you're gonna start to see this on social media. We are making real progress toward getting to be a real boy Pinocchio style on YouTube with enough subscribers, enough watchers, enough video views, times watched, all that other stuff. And gosh, we would love to be able to get over the hump and be able to have like a real channel with all the features and links in the stuff, in our comments and everything. So please spread that all out. But so. From Flying Space Whale, Aidan and Ty, what was the worst gaming publication you ever read? Aidan, do you have this one just off the dome?
Ooh, off the top of my head. I'm trying to think through my collection. There were definitely like random one-off magazines that I would buy that I wasn't a fan of. Some of the single console magazines, like in the sort of like mid-aughts Xbox 360 era,
Yeah.
like some of those were pretty grim. That was an era of magazines that I outside of a few favorites, there was not a lot there for me. So that's probably where I'd go. Or yeah, some of those just like really like hyper-focused single console magazines in the mid-aughts. It's just a generation of games that also wasn't super appealing to me, like that 2006, 2007, like Gears of War type environment. Yeah.
And I'd actually go older. Some of there was in the 8-bit days, because I point out I've been subscribing to, I subscribed to Game Players in 3rd grade, which for me, 88, something like that. So it was like, but there are a couple, I think actually it might have been Tips and Tricks.
Yeah.
And this is not any shade on Tips and Tricks, the publication overall, but I think I picked up one issue and realized it was, at least at that time, only tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Like literally only strategy guides and codes and special moves. And I went, oh, this isn't what I read magazines for, like, at all, guys. Like, I'm sorry, this is not the thing for me. And I put it right back down, and I don't think I picked up another issue. And again, I don't want to say it was the worst, but it was just not what I come to these publications for.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was never really too heavily into the tips and tricks, or like Game Players had their or no, was it EGM2? Was that their like tips and tricks version? So. But yeah, because a lot of the time you'd get it and you'd have one game, and it wasn't compelling in a way, like didn't tell a story, about the games to make me like want them. So yeah, that's a good one for sure.
And folks, you might not have long to wait if you want to hear us actually look at a tips and tricks issue. But Toupee also writes, again, this is at our Discord, community Discord. My question is, was there something in a magazine that made either one of you have to write into them? Bonus points if your letter was printed, double bonus points if it was snail mail.
I mean, I recently wrote Jeff Lundgren about his Yoshi's Island review in Game Players.
Did you actually?
Because his email was in there, and I had a few choice words for him.
Did you email? Did it come? Did it bounce back? You should.
I should. I'm going to now. You can hear me chattering. Can you hear my keyboard?
That'd be incredible if he still had that @netcom.com address.
Yeah. What do you mean these cartoon graphics look bad? I never wrote in. Being in Canada made it a little tricky, honestly. We write in, and my kids do a lot of sending art and taking pictures and sending it to like Chirp and Chickadee, which are like Canadian kids magazines, but they've never got in, much to their chagrin. Every issue we get, we flip to the back super fast to see if they're in there, and they're never in there. It's just little kids with hilarious, regretful names.
I wrote in a few times. I got published twice in Game Players.
No.
Yeah.
What issues? How have we not seen this before?
I don't think it aged super well. But no,
I'm Googling everybody.
No. So I know the one, I think I actually mentioned it during the Chrono Trigger episode because Sonya Blade was on the cover. And I think I might have even cut it out of the episode because I Googled and I realized I got it wrong on the timing. But there was a Mortal Kombat live show that toured the country, like, because that was kind of the thing in like the late 80s, early 90s, was like, a Ninja Turtles live show, like name your kid's property of choice. And like 5 actors in costumes and some cheap sets and some whatever, and they'd come out and do a show, and you could fill a convention hall or a civic center, right?
Yeah.
So there was a Mortal Kombat live show, and it did feature the mocap, like,
yes, okay, I remember you
cast.
telling the story.
Yeah. The Carrie Haskins, I think it was, because I looked this up. The mocap actor for Sonya Blade did play Sonya Blade in the live show. And so my mom and I would always watch the local news and then the national news at 6 p.m. and 6:30, right? So my mom would like come home from work, make a quick dinner, and we'd like sit down. And so I'd like usually watch the local news by myself, and then she'd finish dinner, then we'd watch the national news together. And so like I'm watching the local news, and there is actual Sonya Blade in full costume on the news in Lansing, Michigan, just like talking about, like come out and see the show, right? Like just doing promo. And I flipped out and immediately wrote in, and it did get published.
It got published.
It didn't age super well. I tried to write it in the sort of, game players over dramatic style, and whatever, that they responded how they responded. It was fine.
Roughly, like, what year would you say this is?
Gravy, dude.
If you were to just like ballpark what year, or maybe even what month this is.
I wanted to look this up and have it be read on the air or printed, I would have done it before we even started the show. I would not be doing it right now.
Saving yourself. All you're saving is me some work.
Okay, right. Yeah. I'll figure it out. I will. I will.
Incredible. I did not know that. But you said there were 2. What was your second?
At least 2.
At least 2.
Oh, I know. Okay. One was this is partly me not quite getting the joke. Was for like a few months they had a like, this month's word, if you put it in your letter, will get you published. And they did one
game player, so it was Wet Dream, right?
Yeah, no, actually it was albedo. I remember specifically, and I knew what albedo was.
Yeah,
and I actually had a take because it was Donkey Kong Country had just come out, and I did not like how everything in the game reflected light like it was made of polished aluminum. And I went, okay, gorilla hair does not have that much surface albedo. So like I wrote in and I can't remember if that was one of the ones that got published or not, but I did immediately write in, and of course then it was like I sent it in, and then I kind of went like, wait a minute. Okay, so it's going to be like minimum 3 or 4 months before they get it, and then albedo won't be then I went, wait a minute. They're fucking with us. Like this is a joke to begin with. But it was only because it dovetailed with an actual take that I already had.
It worked. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Yeah, no, I never, to my memory, I never sent any. But definitely didn't get any in, any issues. Would have been pretty cool. I'd probably still have it like on my wall if I did. I'm pretty sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right. Okay, we have spent way too long on this. We've spent way too long on the episodes.
This episode is crazy. It was supposed to be a fast one.
It was supposed to be a fast one, folks. And peek behind the curtain. We did the letters last after we already did the review. So when we come back, an incredibly thorough, deep, and emotionally fraught review of a game that, in the context of this episode, the kayfabe of this episode, I don't even know what game it is yet. And neither do you. And you will be surprised when you find out right here on Fun Factor. Well, we are having 5 out of 5 stars worth of fun today. And folks, if you are too, leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. We will read the best, funniest, kindest, and most entertaining ones on the air. Of course, also reach out via Discord. Join our Discord community. Just go to funfactorpod.com and you have our socials there. Get the Discord link. Join us. We have a lot of great conversations. You get some behind the scenes stuff, as well as just like, hey, it's a really well-read, well-informed community that loves video games, loves geeky topics, loves writing, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, join us. We will read your comments there too if you have words to pass along. But hey, listen, it is time to do the thing that we do. We are going to review Edge Magazine's review of what? Aidan, you slow rolled this on me again. What game are we reviewing?
I do that. We're going to review Edge Magazine's review of a game that never actually came out in the UK.
Oh,
so we'll get there. We'll get there in a second. I'm going to slow roll it a little bit more. Do not look at the episode title.
Wait. It never came out in the UK?
No.
Then why did they review it?
Because it's a good one.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow.
So let's just get to it. Let's get to the meat of things. Page 61 of this issue of Edge brings us to Test Screen, which is the name of Edge's review section. Notably and interestingly, it never actually uses the word like review anywhere associated with this content, which I think is probably intentional. But I'm not sure what the purpose of that would be. But it seemed like the omission seemed so obvious that it was worth pointing out. The page runs down a table of contents with of each game review. There's 10 total in this issue. And then there's also a kind of tableau of associated screenshots of each game indicating the page number for that review. Clean, easy to read, much like the magazine. And the visual aspect of showing all the games is also interesting because, you know, there's just that little hook to maybe get you to look at something you might not otherwise have paid attention to. Flipping forward a page reveals the first review, which is Need for Speed for the 3DO. Unlike many of its American contemporaries at this time, Edge wasn't leaning into capsule reviews. Instead, each review is at least a full page with massive screenshot mosaics, and this main feature review is clocking in at like 3 pages. In a lot of ways, it almost looks and feels like a feature preview that might appear in another magazine. It also looks identical to the previews earlier in Edge. And so it's a kind of a mix of like a feature on this game and also a review or a critique, which is probably why they didn't call them reviews.
Yeah.
It's a deep, kind of complex look at the game. And then at the end, Edge gives a rating out of 10. No weighted averages, no category scores, just a single numerical value.
Hey, Aidan, I got to tell you, I'm a little caught up on if you're watching the visual version of this on YouTube. Opposite the test screen page on page 61, there is a full page ad, looking through a lady in lingerie through horizontal blinds, like mini blinds. And then in like a faux biblical font, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife." And you can see it's got like a autofocus and like a targeting reticle for a camera with a record light. And the game is called Voyeur with the tagline ellipsis, "Don't get caught."
I
okay.
did not pay attention to that. I have, when I'm looking through a lot of these PDFs, they're on single page like scroll.
Mine defaulted to double page for some reason. I think because I like to capture the the visual version, get the 2-page spreads.
Yes, of course.
And that's I don't think that would have flown in the U.S. in 1993. I'm not
fly
sure
anywhere
it fly anywhere ever.
Warning:
yeah.
This material is not suitable for persons under the age of 18. It also, like, the ad copy is in like the Diablo font.
Yeah, like the T's are crosses, like,
but only one of the T's.
Oh yeah.
In covet is like a Diablo cross. It very strange and unsettling. They did spell neighbors correctly.
But with the U.
I'll give them that.
Yes. every once in a while, Aiden and I have the great Canadian, the Commonwealth versus Free State divide over where yous go. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I just had to point out this is, again, emblematic of some of the differences in content in US and the UK at this time. And, while I think a lot of people, I remember as a teenager hearing, well, hey, look, Europe has a much more like enlightened attitude towards sex, and like, they don't run around hiding kids' eyes from, boobs on TV and stuff.
The Brits?
But
is that like, have we ever felt that way about the Brits?
I don't know that.
Tell us.
I don't know.
British listeners.
I don't know that the Brits necessarily get looped. And I remember, watching like Monty Python, right? Like there are some funny skits that would, immediately get slapped with an R because there's boobs in it. And it's like, okay, well,
right.
At the same time, some of the liberties that you could then take with sex and sexuality were not necessarily progressive by default at this time in UK or in continental Europe. So just, again, worth pointing out, that was a little bit horrifying to see. We can continue.
That's a bad one.
Yeah.
That's a very bad one. By Interplay, too.
Yeah.
Video games. The next review in this issue is for the cover game, Little Big Adventure, LBA. There's no other coverage in the magazine. So again, there's this blurred line between sort of features and criticism in the way that they portray these. So Little Big Adventure's on the cover. It's the lead, or it's the big review in this issue, and that's the coverage. There's no, like, it's not, attached to a feature or whatever. It is the feature, which is really interesting. Maxed out at 5 full pages. That's a lot of pages for a review. Nobody else was doing anything like this at the time that I'm aware of, at least in sort of the mainstream North American spaces, until Next Gen, which is an offshoot of Edge here.
Well, and even then, Next Generation tacked in the opposite direction. Their reviews were called Now Playing, and they were actually quite concise. They would put big 5, 10, 12 page previews like this together, but not scored reviews.
Yeah. I've never seen this where like a review is like 5 pages.
And a bunch
and then has a score at the end.
Huge and beautiful screenshots, I have to point out, too.
Yeah. Really nice. I mean, Little Big Adventure, you got to work to get really nice screenshots of Little Big Adventure. But yeah, it's like the layout, the like seriousness of it. Comes back to that idea that it just feels like it's something that's made to treat games as culture, not as toys or entertainment solely. It helps the magazine come across feeling like heavier, like with more gravitas, something written for adults, not just by adults, but for adults.
Yeah. And I mean, we can, like, earlier with the cover art, because now we've seen this, and again, in case it's not clear, I have no history with Little Big Adventure. I think I have heard people say the words Little Big Adventure on podcasts, but I truly have no concept. And this is obviously done in the art style on the cover. They may have even asked the team to create the cover shot of one of the characters playing Saturn.
It is credited. Yeah, it is credited to the developer in the masthead.
That's very cool. So these screenshots, and like I said, I took some shots at it, but we have the main character flying on a dragon here. There's some texture on the dragon's skin. Granted, it looks like a cucumber. Like this is VeggieTales level dragon skin. But there's like the blade, the sword that the character here has, like it's like Damascus steel. It's got like the rippling steel effect. Like there's a lens flare on the tip. Like there is clearly a level of art direction and care that's been put into this game. And again, even if it hasn't aged well, it absolutely would have. Again, this is what, January 1995? This would absolutely have blown my mind in January 1995.
Oh yeah, this would have been one that you're looking at screenshots of being like, whoa, like this is, pre-Diablo, and there's some pretty impressive detailed, like isometric environments. I actually, don't really remember Little Big Adventure, but what I remember is Twinson's Odyssey, which is Little Big Adventure 2. Okay. And it was released in North America as Twinson's Odyssey. That one I remember looking at in magazines a lot and being like, oh, that looks really interesting. Looks different, looks new. However, Ty, we are not here to talk about Need for Speed or Little Big Adventure. Today, we are flipping over to page 77
Oh,
for
shit.
Edge's review
Oh, shit.
of Final Fantasy 3.
Oh, shit.
Or Final Fantasy 6,
Yeah.
which did not ever come out in the UK. At least until 2002, when it was released on the PlayStation, which you should not play that.
Friends. I hate to hit this. We hit this so hard in the last episode, and we hit it so hard 3 episodes before that. Format SNES, publisher Squaresoft, developer in-house, price £70, parentheses import, £70. I believe the exchange rate was about 1.5 at this time. You were looking at like 120 to 130 US dollars.
Right
equivalent.
now,
Yeah.
today, £70 would be 130 Canadian dollars.
Oh my good lord.
Which is more than like, the crazy Nintendo pricing on the Switch 2 stuff, which is like $115 for Mario Party.
Good gravy.
Yeah. So yes, very expensive, but Final Fantasy 6, is it worth it? It's worth it, right?
As I keep saying, I paid 85 US for Chrono Trigger of my own damn money when I was 14 years old. So
worth it.
I would, yes, I would have paid it.
Yeah, I don't know what I paid for Final Fantasy 3. Well, I know what I paid because I bought a cartridge. Actually, I got a cartridge for Christmas a few years ago, so I didn't pay anything. $0. Final Fantasy 3 at the time, Final Fantasy 6 now, did not come out in the UK, which is why, we can cover it in a 1994 video game magazine issue on a season predominantly covering 1995 and 1996, and B, it also says a lot about being an RPG fan in the UK during this period. But we'll get to that. We'll touch on that. Normally, this is the part where I would tell you about the reviewer, who they were, maybe what they kind of liked, where they went. But as mentioned earlier, nothing in Edge has a byline. So it's impossible to know who wrote this, or even if it was someone on staff, or just a, freelancer, maybe an American freelancer.
Aidan, I would love to be a freelancer for this. Because
can you imagine?
They got, well, for starters, this is a 1-page review, most of which is screenshots. Mm-hmm. I would ballpark this at about 180 to 220 words, maybe, pushing it, for reviewing one of the greater RPGs of all time. Certainly would crack any, top 25 RPGs of all time, would crack of people of a certain age, such as ages of the people making this podcast. Many of us would have it in our, top 10 games, not even RPGs, but like games of all time. Just a tidy little review here.
That's a lot of plaudits for a game that got 10.
Yeah.
Edge. Number 16. Can you, beep out that though?
Yeah. Will do. Yeah.
The review itself, unlike the reviews for the game-changing, genre-changing classic Little Big Adventure, as you mentioned, it only gets a single-page review, which is pretty short, but it is an import, and you can see that it was something that, the writer, whoever they were, recognized that, like, this is a big game, and we need to cover it because RPG fans here in the UK want RPG coverage. They want RPGs, and it's hard to get to. The review itself is fairly short, as you touched on. Could you read that for me, Ty?
In its first week on sale in Japan, Final Fantasy III sold over 2 million units. This figure would ordinarily make dollar signs flash up in the eyes of any software salesman in the West, until you mention the fatal phrase, role-playing game. RPGs, we're told, don't sell outside Japan. You can get away with action-oriented titles like Secret of Mana or Zelda, but true role players are regarded as a lost cause. But if any RPG is destined to be an exception to the rule, it's Final Fantasy III, which was actually called Final Fantasy VI in Japan. This is a game that is indisputably at the pinnacle of its genre. The graphics, a sophisticated combination of digitized images and traditional artwork, are arguably the most detailed ever seen on the SNES. Battles, which take place in real time, brackets, question mark, hyphen editor, close bracket, are fast and offer a huge variety of magic, weapons, and attacks. The music is sumptuous, though not quite as good as Mana's score. The only real drawback is the structure of the game. Because you're taking part in a story, Final Fantasy III is essentially linear. Although the random battle sequences add an element of unpredictability to the proceedings, many people will find them irritating compared to the fight when you want gameplay of Mana. There's nothing more frustrating than being flung into one scrap after another just when you're trying to explore a new location. Square has to be applauded for bringing FF3 to the West so soon after its Japanese release. Although the translation of the text exhibits a lack of sympathy for the feel and tone of the original game, FF3 is a vital game for anyone bitten by the RPG bug. Edge rating EIGHT out of TEN. And I spell that out because they spelled it out.
I got a lot of thoughts, Ty. But
do you?
First, what
do you?
What do you think? I do.
I also have a lot of thoughts. Good gravy. Indisputably,
let me kick this off with the big one. Quote, "This is a game that is indubitably at the pinnacle of its genre." 8 out of 10. So we're maxing out like RPGs, console RPGs can be 8 out of 10 tops, max. That's, I don't know about that.
I really got hung up on the drawback here is the structure of the game.
Well, that was another thing I had thoughts on. Somebody didn't play the second half.
Well, okay, but even because you're taking part in a story, Final Fantasy III is essentially linear. Now, I'm not going to say that all video games take part in a story. Most video games at least have an inciting incident and then a conclusion. Like, you get an opening crawl, vigilantes have kidnapped Madonna, go whatever, right? And then an end screen, hooray, you saved Madonna. I don't know, I never beat Vigilante.
That was Final Fantasy X too.
Yes, that's correct. Okay, anyway. So there's some sort of story, but like, again, Mario 3 had a story.
Very linear game.
Extremely linear. Are we sitting here? Doom had no story and therefore was not linear? ? I
read Doom novel. Doom had a 6 story.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Hell Demons on Mars? Come on.
Yeah, no, but but you know what I'm saying here? I'm like, this Final Fantasy 3 was exceptionally non-linear for its time. And incredibly deep and broad. There was so much missable content. There was so much stuff that you could see out of order. You had the chains were off in a real way. You could lose characters forever simply by skipping ahead, right? And you could skip ahead just by wandering around. I'm flabbergasted trying to put this in because there is a story, that means it's linear, as opposed to every other goddamn video game on the Super Nintendo. F-Zero. Yeah. Was F-Zero like non-linear to you because you could choose King's Cup and Queen's Cup series? Like what are you talking about?
This is a big criticism I have of this piece as well. World of Ruin is very clearly non-linear. That's its whole thing. And it was kind of revolutionary in the space at the time. But even early on, like you get to a point very early in the game where you have to pick between those 3 parties. Terra and Locke.
Yes.
And
yes.
Sabin, I guess. Yeah,
you can split parties and even you can just wander around the continent after you get out of the Locke sneaky aroundy mission. Once you get back out on the continent, you can just wander around the whole damn continent and see whatever you want to see. And there may not be much to see, but it's certainly non-linear.
But even like breaking out of like linearity is like world exploration or whatever, like Final Fantasy 3 also, or 6 I suppose, was also the first introduction or reintroduction I suppose of non-linear like character building. But even that, like even Final Fantasy 1, like you had the job system, but you then just like there was no switching jobs, right? Final Fantasy 5 and 3 to a lesser extent have very non-linear character building systems, right? And they're fabulous. 6 had, with the Esper system, every character had, of course, their own special, unique abilities, but the Esper system, like, you could turn Sabin into a fantastic white mage if you wanted to.
Yes.
Right? Like, you could turn whoever you wanted to. You could turn, Realm into a frontline fighter if you wanted to. All of that existed, and all of that was possible in Final Fantasy VI, which is, like, non-linearity to me. The fact that, there's such a big party, and you have to make multiple, like, fighting, like, party teams in certain dungeons. All of that is, like, is it structurally linear, that there's a story that takes place over the course of, story beats that follow one after the other? Like, sure, but there's so many areas for, like, player agency, and I think, like, linearity is about player agency. And then narratively, like, my brother's actually playing Final Fantasy VI for the first time in a long time, and he keeps messaging me, and he was, one of the first messages he sent was like, "Hey, Aidan, like, who do you think is the main character of Final Fantasy VI?" And I have ideas, and then we could have an episode on that. But the point is that, like, even the experience within the game can differ based on how you portray, like, this story and who it revolves around, who the conflict in the game revolves around. And every time I play it, that changes a little bit. I just can't see any way that you can look at Final Fantasy VI as being, like, a linear experience outside of sort of some of the, like, the early game where there is fairly strict narrative linearity, but it's not like Final Fantasy X. Like, I'm playing that right now, and it's literally a straight line.
That's a hallway
from, like, the beginning of the game to the end of the game. And I, like, was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt, but it's, like, straight up just exactly what I remember, a hallway. That's linearity. Even that's character building system, like the sphere grid, like, there's an expert mode in some of the newer versions, which are very non-linear and interesting, but the basic sphere grid it's like pretty linear character building.
Well, and again, I'm sorry, in Super Nintendo, Super Mario World is a hallway, Star Fox is a hallway, fucking Super Street Fighter 2. Like, I'm like, give me any Super Nintendo game, and it is so much more linear. This may be
but okay,
the most non-linear Super Nintendo game ever made. And, like, we're thinking about this from the perspective of, like, North American console RPG players, right? If this was somebody who was playing a lot of Wizardry or grew up playing Ultima, if this was somebody who was into Sim Ant or Sid Meier's, Sid Meier made one of the other games he made was called Civilization. Didn't do the lesser known
go anywhere,
ones.
But it was like
the deep
non-linear,
the deep cuts,
deep cut, exactly. If you're playing a lot of Civilization or Sim Earth, I could see that Final Fantasy 3 would feel more linear in that regard, but that's not the comparison the reviewer keeps making. The reviewer keeps comparing it to Secret of Mana and Zelda, both of which were quite well. Zelda was not linear back then. Zelda 1 especially, but even Zelda Link to the Past was fairly non-linear in its second half, but it has the same structure as Final Fantasy VI. That it's pretty linear at the beginning and then gets non-linear. Secret of Mana was very linear, outside of a few moments where you can kind of go one way or the other.
And I'm going to point out here, Aidan, if you are a Tales from the Backlog fan, and you should be, there is an upcoming episode featuring me playing Link to the Past with host Dave Jackson, and it's in both of our backlogs. Both of us started it. I started it once before. He started it several times before. Both of us fell off it, and we both beat it and talked about our experiences. And Aidan, do you think we came in under 1 hour? No. Under 2 hours? No. Yes. Under 3
I've been on Dave's
hours?
Show. Yeah.
Well, listen to the episode and you'll see. Yeah. But we had thoughts, and it's remarkable how much it kind of mirrors that. And as non-linear as Link to the Past was and is, and as much as that was ambitious, we are still talking about a completely different world. Final Fantasy 3/6 wildly outclasses it in terms of the amount of actual impactful choice you have at every step of the way. Yeah. And, they're like, these random battles kind of spice things up a little bit. Like what? Like what? I mean, relics, weapons, armor, like you're saying, the espers, there are so many options with your party, and you can come out of it, you can have a completely different game at the end of it who you like and who you play with and who you're drawn to and who you build out. It is astounding to me that you can look at what else is out there and look at this and be like, I felt kind of trapped by the fact that there's a story.
Yeah. And I think the mention of random battles, and the quote is, although the random battle sequences add an element of unpredictability to the proceedings, many people will find them irritating compared to the fight when you want gameplay of Mana. That tells me that they probably hadn't played a ton of console RPGs with random battles, that they were probably more used to other types of conflict in games. If you're kind of looking at random battles as something being, like novel at that point. Continually coming back to Mana tells me that they want to be making a lot of like micro choices. And if they see that, like, if random battles or the structure of Final Fantasy feels like, one linear event to them, it's like I'm in the town and then I talk to the person, and then I leave the town, then I fight a battle, then I take some steps and I fight a battle and I reach the dungeon, and then I find, you could say it's like that, a bunch of micro events, one in a row that leads you to the end of the game. But that's sort of kind of diverting from the agency that the game gives. And it makes me wonder if the person who played this really like got deep enough to really understand what Final Fantasy VI was doing. All the screenshots are from the first half of the game. In fact, all the screenshots are from fairly early in the game. And so, I do wonder about the person's background. And there's no, like, that's not a knock. People don't need to have played this. Final Fantasy VI introduced a lot of people to the genre. I wasn't even really a fan when it first came out. And kind of discovered it through Final Fantasy VI. So, like, I'm not asking somebody to be, an expert on this genre at this time. But when you say it's too linear, when it's like a game that historically is known for its non-linearity, and then you call it, the one of the best RPGs, or like the pinnacle of RPGs, and then give it an 8 out of 10, it just feels like there's maybe some, I don't know, just some disconnect between what they were expecting or what they were seeing and what they were sort of trying to portray to me as well.
Yeah, and here's the other thing with the no bylines. And Next Generation did this to an extent as well, about how they're, we all stand behind all the content of this magazine. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, if you review Final Fantasy III, which you laud as both the pinnacle of RPGs and the pinnacle of graphics.
Yeah, this game reminds me of Boss Baby. Yeah.
And you laud it even though it's not even released in the market of your magazine, and then you relentlessly compare it to Secret of Mana, which getting real Boss Baby vibes. You know what I mean? Like, if the only other one of these
this game reminds me of Boss Baby.
Yeah. But then Square has to be applauded for bringing FF3 to the West so soon after its Japanese release, although the translation of the text exhibits a lack of sympathy for the feel and tone of the original game. Okay, so are you someone who reads Japanese fluently enough to say this Ted Woolsey guy doesn't know what he's doing?
I know I stumbled on that a little bit. But like, the tone and texture of Final Fantasy VI is very unique, right? Like, it is very dark and gritty for the time and melancholy, and Woolsey's translation was not that. So I'm assuming the reviewer's not going for the, like, localization versus like direct translation or whatever nonsense. That it's more that like, hey, this is a game that takes place like in these sort of rundown mining town that's hiding rebels, and like there's like genocide is a huge theme in the game, and then Woolsey has all these silly little jokes.
But also the tone and feel of the original game. The implication is, to me, hey, I played this in the original Japanese, and let me tell you, playing it now again in English, this translation misses the mark. But if like that seems to be the implication to me, and maybe that's just phrasing, and maybe that's me reading into it. But it's also like, okay, but then I need to see by somebody who reads Japanese at the end of that.
Two linked things here that I want to bring up. Little Big Adventure, the cover game, feature cover story, 9 out of 10. I think most people would probably rank Final Fantasy VI higher for its longevity. Tying that then into the fact that there are no bylines, you know what this review reads like to me, Ty? This review reads to me like something that somebody filed who probably plays a lot of RPGs, probably has fairly strong feelings about RPGs, strong fandom, and the editor probably intervened. This feels to me like something that was half written and rewritten by an editor who was like, we can't give this random import game our highest mark when we have our cover story game. And then that would also kind of explain the structure where it's like two big paragraphs being like, this game is incredible. It's the best RPG out there. And then, oh, but wait, here are the bad things. And then kicker paragraph. That again says like, oh, this is like, you know, really good, but there's this bad thing, but it's also vital for anybody. You know, that just screams to me like an editor coming in and being like, oh, like this was too glowing. And, you know, as a whole, I don't think Edge would give this a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. So we're going to bump that down, and now we have to justify that in the text. That's what it reads like to me.
I think you're right.
This
you're right.
feels to me like something that was half written and rewritten by an editor who was like, we can't give this random import game our highest mark when we have our cover game.
Yeah.
And then that would also kind of explain the structure where it's like two big paragraphs being like, this game is incredible. It's the best RPG out there. And then, oh, but wait, here are the bad things. And then kicker paragraph. Yeah. That again says like, oh, this is like, you know, really good, but there's this bad thing, but it's also vital for anybody. You know, that just screams to me like an editor coming in and being like, oh, like this was too glowing. And, you know, as a whole, I don't think Edge would give this a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. So we're going to bump that down, and now we have to justify that in the text.
Let me also...
That's what it reads like to me.
You're probably right. I, in fact, would bet that you're right. I could also pitch you the reverse scenario where someone was assigned to review this because the editor knew the significance and knew the audience would want to pay for and import it. We've got to cover this. It's legendary. And then got this back and went, we're going to have to punch this up in a couple of spots. You know what I mean? But like,
it could go either way.
Right. And then
that would explain a lot.
Again, because we don't have, this doesn't say by Jeff Lundgren, the RPG guy. No, this doesn't say by the cartoon character guy from Game Fan who likes RPG.
Todd, the Secret of Mana fan.
Exactly. Right? Like we don't have that, so we don't know which direction it went. I'm just raising it as a possibility it went the other way.
And like they don't even have like a lot of the magazines at this time had those like little bio sections for the writers, and so we could go and look and be like, oh, okay, here are the writers, and it's like, you know, Todd's favorite games, Secret of Mana 2, Secret of Mana whatever, and we were like, oh, okay, like Todd probably wrote that Final Fantasy 3 review. Like we can't even sort of connect like the dots between who would have written this, whether it was even a staffer or not, or it was a freelancer. Right. So it's like, it's so hard when you have something like criticism that like you don't get objective criticism. And I think that's a core idea of this show, right? Everything here is subjective. But when you take bylines away, like we've talked about on past episodes, it removes your ability to understand the context in which the criticism is written.
And I'll just say again, you know, we talked about the quality of the screenshots before. All of this stuff, you look at this big inset picture of Terra piloting the Magitech armor through Narsh, Edgar in Vector, Chocobo with the Mode 7 world map, lock in Zozo with the rain pouring down and some poor fool like face down in the muck. A couple of random battles, you know, in the mountain pass, and then the opera house, like the curtains rising with the orchestra playing. And again, in January of 1995, if I am a kid or a teenager in the UK at this time, I am looking at those screenshots and I'm reading this review.
Oh yeah,
and I'm like, I am gonna beg, borrow, or steal 70 pounds plus shipping, and I am gonna get this game.
Yeah, and you're going to order it from, I distribution, which has an ad on page 99.
Oh. Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, they sell Saturn, PlayStation, Jaguar. I've noticed something as you were talking, though. You were asking about their comments about the original game. If you look at those two battle screenshots, the names of the team members are in lowercase, which means that the player renamed them. The default names of Final Fantasy VI are in uppercase, like Bannon in one of the screenshots. The rest, they've renamed everybody with lowercase names. So you have Edgar, spelled Edgar, same way, but then you have Lock, Lock.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And then what do you see?
Okay, so number one, Lock is Lock, not Locke.
Mm-hmm. And then... Which would be probably a closer translation to Japanese.
Right. Yeah. But Lock, okay, but we're not even going to go there. But then Tina, capital T, lowercase INA, Tina. And I'll let you fill in the blanks, even though I know what they are.
So for those who don't know, Tina is the official Japanese name for Terra. So whoever this was in 1995, playing a 1994 game, was somebody, whoever was taking these screenshots, which from my understanding, whoever was reviewing the game was in charge of taking screenshots.
Almost most universally, of the
time. Yes. Whoever was playing this understood and did have connection to the Japanese original, whether that was through previews, whether that was through speaking Japanese, whether that was, whatever. They knew at that time that Terra's name in Japan was Tina. And so that gives some context for who we're looking at, or their background with Japanese RPGs or familiarity with stuff like Final Fantasy was probably fairly high for somebody in 1994, late 1994, when they were probably reading this. What do we do with that? I don't know, but it does kind of give context to some of the conversations we've been having.
It lends credence to the idea that this is someone who did play the original, or at least had an understanding of the original in Japanese.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Then went, okay, cool, let me play this US translation and review it. Basically your worldview, where a true sicko reviewed this, and then an editor came in and added some tweaks and toned it down and changed the score.
Toned it down, yeah. Knocked it down a peg or two. I'm certain that's what's happening.
I bet you're right.
What do you say? Let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
What do you give Edge 16's review of Final Fantasy 3/Final Fantasy 6?
Aidan, we've been talking about using the whole score, the whole range of the score, and we're coming off me giving at least my first 10 out of 10, and I am looking at this, and I'm gonna give it 3 Moogles out of 10.
3 Moogles out of 10.
3 Moogles out of 10.
Ty, I'm gonna give it 6 Final Fantasies out of 10, which of course we know translates to 3 Final Fantasies out of 10. So I'm right there with you. I think this review is kind of a mess. I think it recognizes some of the things the game does really well, but it argues very unevenly and contradictorily for and against it in a way that doesn't mesh with sort of coherent criticism. I think this is a bad review.
I agree. And I think, again, it's the contradictions of, why did you review it? Why did you put it in your magazine? Who advocated for it being reviewed? Who greenlit it being reviewed? Who decided it's significant enough that we must review it, but it's not significant enough to give it any more than this little bit of text? And I feel like if you're going to do it at all, you need to do it more justice than this. And again, it's like, hey, listen, I am here for a critique of Final Fantasy VI, right? Like, if you want to tell me I tried to play this game and I had no fun, especially contemporaneously, but even now, I get it, man. Like, there are sections, even right off the bat, like as soon as you get out of Narsh, if you don't have some experience with the genre, you start wandering around, and you can wander into the desert towards Figaro, and just start getting your ass kicked, and you have no idea why. Like there are very legitimate complaints about this game, and even about the first 10, 20 hours of this game.
But like what you're describing is a lack of linearity and handhold.
True. Yeah.
Right.
Like, why is that the complaint? It doesn't make any sense.
It's so strange, right? And there are lots of games that I don't like that other people love, right? And there are ways to write about that. Anyone who follows me on Blue Sky has been watching me write about Final Fantasy X, which is beloved, but which I dislike, and I have been trying, with a lot of humor to unpack why I dislike it so much. You can do that. That's fine. That's criticism, right? Criticism is not and should never be a buyer's guide. It should not be selling you on anything. Its purpose is to understand.
It was visceral to me playing Final Fantasy X at the time. Yeah. Like, wow, I have played so many of these Final Fantasies, and this is a big departure. This linearity is a big departure, and I feel railroaded. And I've been waiting for like 30 hours to get to the overworld where I can do whatever I want. And it was shocking and disappointing to basically never get to that point until the very, 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 very end, right? Yeah. But that's still a fun game. There's still lots to recommend about it, right? It did so much so well. And so I don't know. I'm sticking with my 3 out of 10. I think that's the lowest score I've given a review to this point. And it's as much because I don't know why you bothered doing it if you weren't going to do a better, fairer job of it.
Agreed. And, if it was a pet thing where somebody fought to get it in the magazine and then they sort of had the floor pulled out from under them as well. Somebody who was like, this game is special and we need to make space for it. Can I have a page? And then, if my theory's correct and they wanted to give it a higher score and they, somebody was like, well, Little Big Adventure is going to get our biggest score this issue. I think it would have been really interesting to see this review written with a byline, because I just think there's something going on there.
And man, let me tell you, I'm not casting aspersions on Edge's editorial oversight. We, just in the very brief, we've read like 6 total pages of this magazine for this issue, right?
Sure.
And 2 of them was the editorial staff going like, hey, we have editorial independence. We're going to give it to you straight. We're going to tell you it's not on game companies. It's not our job to defend game companies. It's our job to tell you what we think. But you got a big original art asset to put on the cover of a big original UK first release. And you gave that UK first release 5 pages and a truckload of screenshots. Yeah. And nobody who wasn't in the UK at this time holds Little Big Adventure close to their heart. Yeah. And Final Fantasy 3/6 is a beloved global classic of the genre. It is remembered exactly as a pinnacle of the genre, right up there with the best of the Super Nintendo, et cetera, et cetera.
Massively influential as well. Like you look at Octopath, cribbing its visual style and stuff, right?
Yes. And the branching paths and the big party and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah. To your point, I wouldn't even necessarily say that there's editorial malfeasance or meddling. Even when you're printing everything without a byline, there has to be a unifying voice. Somebody in there has to unify that voice, right? So you don't have something in a single voice ascribed to a single entity, Edge Magazine, that then has wild contradictory takes. And so when you're publishing in that unified space, it comes with consequences. That individualism of the writers is the thing that goes. You can't have individualism in the way that EGM or Game Players was really leaning into it this time. If you're not going to let writers speak for themselves. And so, if somebody came in and said, this is great, but this isn't really what Edge wants. We can't really give an import Super Nintendo game from last year our highest score when we're trying to, make a magazine with this on the cover or whatever. somebody comes in and says like, oh, it's great you think that, but Edge can't think that. Edge has to kind of take this stance on the games this month. And, like, I don't even know, that's not a situation I would like to be in as a writer, but I don't know that that's necessarily like meddling or, like overstepping editorial bounds, if that's sort of the vision of the magazine. But
yeah, and again, it's not being a UK release, all that other stuff. There's all sorts of factors that could come in here before we start going towards like, oh well, like the publisher was pushing Little Big Adventure, so we're pushing Little Big. I'm not implying that's what happened. No, but this is also again a part of just editorial production, design flow, where you have somebody who believes something and a manager in any industry. You've got one person who's like, this is the way I see it. I believe in the vision. And the manager goes, okay, like you're good. And I trust you, but also your taste's a little weird. And like, can we, okay, I'll let you do your thing, but I'm going to tone it down a little bit. And like, that's a very plausible and real decision and responsible decision for a manager to make, or, in journalism, an editor to make. But in this case, the end result is just a complete mess from a critical perspective.
And like, Edge's tagline is the future of interactive entertainment. And somebody coming in and saying they want to talk about a game from last year. Like, again, it comes back to so many different factors where it's like, it's almost contradictory to the nature of the magazine. And so how do you address that in, like if you're an editor and that comes in and it's glowing and you're like, listen, like we're interested in future technology, the growth of technology and how it supports culture and art. I can't print this with you giving it a 10 out of 10. How can we look at like this within context of what, the way games are changing? Could you add in there, the fact that it's still old pixel art graphics, or the fact that, the 2D movement in 2D flat environments feels stagnant compared to the 3D open worlds that we are now experiencing and stuff like Little Big Adventure. Like there are ways to tone things down in context or that match what Edge wants to portray without asking the writer to kind of file and then revise something into something that, says this is the greatest RPG ever, but then also has weird like complaints that don't line up with the experience and like then totally undermine and don't support a score that doesn't reflect the celebratory tone of most of that review. It's just like, it just feels like a mess all around.
Yeah.
So,
all right. I think we've come to our conclusion.
3 Moogles, 3 Final Fantasy 6s out of 10. I think we got there.
I certainly do. And friends, if you don't think we got there, or you think we got to the wrong place, please let us know. Join the Discord. Tell us there. Leave a review. Whatever you want to do. Tell us on social media. We're on Blue Sky at funfactorpod.com. Everywhere else at funfactorpod. We love bringing this to you. Please let us know. Got to give out special thanks to Millennium Falck for all our amazing original music. Check out his work and his awesome Windows 95 styled website at millenniumfalck.com. And unlike the old magazines we review, you won't have to wait a whole month for your next installment. We drop new episodes every 2 weeks, so go to funfactorpod.com and follow our show on your podcatcher of choice, and please consider becoming a member of Fun Factor Ultra, our premium tiers to follow ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and the members-only channels of our Discord. Just go to funfactorpod.com, and I promise you cannot miss the sign-up widget on our home. If you do, you and we will have a maximum score in Fun Factor. Unquote. Is that just what you want me to stop there? Keep going.
No, I'll read the next. I'll follow up now. That's actually why I got you to read this quote, because I don't know how to say that word either.
Oh goodness.
You can throw at that.
Yeah.
I think just translate.
Sorry, I have like now 4 Microprose Wikipedia tabs up and not the script. I'm rabbit holing as we speak. Okay. Oh, that's even fully the wrong script. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
All
We'll
right,
see
cool.
if anything kind of comes in.
Desmo. No, it's all right, buddy. Okay, so I have some tree trimming to do. This is very funny because for weeks I was hearing weird banging sounds that sounded almost like they were coming from the furnace. And I was really weirded out, and it was like so intermittent. I couldn't figure out any kind of pattern. And when I went to the basement, it was like, no, it's not coming from down here. But then I would come back upstairs and I'd be like, no, it sounds like it's coming from the furnace. Like it has that like hollow, like metal duct sound, right? And what we found out is the big oak tree that hangs over our garage grew a branch that is now touching the rain cap on our chimney.
Oh.
So as the wind blows the branch, it's going like bang, bang, bang,
Oh,
bang.
that doesn't sound good.
I mean, it's then resonating down our chimney.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
yeah.
So like it's a very small sound, but it's just bonking.
Yeah,
like
well,
a,
and then when
a
it's
1-inch tree branch over an aluminum thing, and it's like, okay, it's so much louder than it. I still have to trim off the branch and whatever, but it.
Yeah.
So
at least you know what it is now, I suppose.
It was driving me. Yeah, it was like, oh my god, it's like, is our it's the middle. We're not running our furnace. Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that just happened, and it triggered our dog.
Oh
Like,
yes.
what?
And
Huh?
the dog.
Bark,
Dog
bark,
doesn't like
bark,
it. Yeah.
bark, bark. Yeah. Okay. So
I should apologize to our British listeners and the entire British nation. Is that how you say it? United Kingdom.
Yeah.
I
think back to the original Ted Lasso promos.
Yes.
Where he's like, "Hey, get out there, Gary!" Talking about Gareth Bale because he was coaching Tottenham, and and he's like, "Where's he from?" "Wales, sir." What is that? Like another country? "Yes, sir." "How many countries are in this country?" "4, sir."
Amazing. I do want to apologize, suggesting that perhaps the Brits aren't as cavalier as their European counterparts. I forgot about the show Naked Attraction.
Yeah.
Which is it's a thing. I keep applying. They keep letting me down.
Before we continue, Aidan,
it,
I know what happened earlier. You said never released in the UK. You meant never released in the US, only released in the UK.
No, I didn't.
What?
We're reviewing a game that was never released in the UK officially.
Really? Because it says released November 18 UK in this thing here.
No. What thing?
Page 67.
Are you looking?
Format PC CD-ROM, publisher Electronic Arts, developer.
No, we're not doing. No. Little Big Adventure is not the game. We are reviewing the review of.
Okay. My
we
apologies.
No, that's okay. Is this going to make it into the episode? This will be an outtake.
Yes.
We are talking about the review format still. I'm just going deep. This is what I do. This is what I do. Yep.
Yes, I could. Give me 20 seconds. 10 seconds. Sorry, my wife and son just went out for a run and they just came back in. That also set off the dog.
Yeah.
So okay.
They went out for a run at 11 o'clock.
Well, it's been so hot here and so humid that my wife normally does 6 miles a day walking, and she usually splits that 3 and 3 morning and evening.
Yeah.
But then the dog is such a baby about any kind of temperature, so she pushes it towards the end, and then our teenagers are all night owls, and so my son's been trying to run, but he's like, dude, I'm not going out there until it's like under whatever temperature. Which
it's been ridiculous here today.
Yeah, too. I believe it. So just just do the whole thing.